do this.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited. This is On the Globe, an education conversation from the US to the UK. I am your co host, Nadia Lopez, joined with the beautiful, fabulous Karen Giles. Good morning, Karen.
Good afternoon.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Y'all, you know it's early. It's 8 o'clock here in the States for me. And Karen, what time is it over there?
It's 1:04.
1:04. So we started this a few months ago. It was like a pilot. And out of it, it was a really, really great conversation. Just a little bit of background. Karen and I met, is it 2017, I believe? In Dubai. I think it's about then.
Yeah.
We met in Dubai as part of the Varkey Foundation's Global Education Skills Forum. And that's also encompasses the celebration of the Global Teacher Prize, which is considered the Nobel Peace Prize for Education, in which educators from around the world who are considered the top notable educators. It goes from several thousands of people applying to 50 down to then 10 to then picking one person who wins $1 million. And so I was part of the 2016 top 50 cohort. And every year since then, I've been blessed to travel to Dubai to enjoy the festivities, but also participate as a lead in education. And so I met Karen, who I swear, and I will always say, she is like the epitome of grace. Um, like if you're aware of Michelle Obama, that energy, that presence, um, the intelligence just comes into a room and commands all of the attention and the regalness. That's what I always say. Karen is she's that version for me. And I can say it because I have met Mrs. Obama, and they're just both amazing, beautiful individuals. So Karen became my mentor. And I say that proudly because as an educator in the US, there's just so much that we don't know about the world as it pertains to our profession. And sometimes we get so closed-minded and focused solely on what's happening in our own backyards that we don't realize that globally, education is connected. Like we all go through similar issues, if not more. And we can stand to learn things from one another as opposed to think that one country is better than the other. And so she has taught me about other educators. She's taught me about the importance of being aware of what's going on in the world, and not just waiting for headlines in the news because also the media is very skewed. And, just overall, what it's like to think differently. And I think that's also important because that comes with maturity and growth. Um, Even being a principal at the time, there's a lot that I still had to and wanted to learn. So, Karen, I always thank you. And I wanted to just say that publicly. But without further ado, we wanted to have this conversation because there's so much going on. Um, you started already school in the UK. You and I have been on the phone since the pandemic and knowing what you had to do to close out the school. So I remember when schools were closed and then they were reopened in the midst of the pandemic as school was closing, like literally maybe 2, 3 weeks before school was closing. And now you all opened school, you went through this entire extensive preparation, and then schools had to close in terms of children were back to remote. So how has the week, the past couple of weeks been for you? Let me start with that. And how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Let's start with that.
So, let's start also with responding to that fantastic introduction. And the only way in which I can kind of make this short in terms of how I feel about you is that if there's a picture dictionary and you look up the word phenomenal, there's a picture of Nadia. So, you know, this is why we vibe. And I think that this is all about not necessarily the kind of mutual appreciation club. This is about the fact that the conversations that we have, just one-on-one, actually there is so much value in them that we felt that it's really beneficial to share, because they are about things that are not just about our immediate location, not just about things that are happening to us personally, but we always tend to synthesize what's going on globally. And so hence this is on the globe. So I'm really pleased to be a part of this. I'm really pleased to be able to share our conversation with others. I want there to be some takeaways for you today. And I'm really hoping that, you know, this is going to be kind of light. This is not deep and intense, but this is something which I know that it will be food for thought. There will be reflection and so on. So when you ask me how I'm feeling today, I think that I would reflect what lots of educators are feeling at the moment, but particularly in the UK. So we went into lockdown in the last proper school day would have been March 20th. So from March 23rd, we were technically in lockdown, but we had to provide education for key worker children on site, and also for those children who are deemed vulnerable, and for children who have special educational and needs and disabilities. Right the way through that time, it was on off in terms of what we felt was really safe, who was attending, who wasn't. From the 1st of June, just to give you a little bit of a background in this, the British government were very keen. And when I say British, I'm going to be really careful, because we may sometimes operate as the United Kingdom, the UK, and then with this situation, we have been operating in terms of nation states. And so sometimes there will be an inconsistency in what the Welsh government are offering in terms of guidelines and what the Scottish government will be, and Ireland, etc. So when I speak about the UK, it's not really, I'm speaking about England because that's where I'm located. And so we got to the 1st of June, we were asked to welcome children who, what we would call, I'm not going to do it in year groups for you, I'm going to do it in terms of ages. The 4 to 5 year olds, the 3 to 4 year olds, the 4 to 5 year olds, the 5 to 6 year olds, and the 10 to 11 year olds. They were invited back to school. I'm speaking about primary because secondary wasn't invited back at that time. We ended up with a situation where, because we have had a degree of autonomy, which has meant that we're able to look at our own context and see what's going to be viable, what's going to be relevant for our own context. Having had a look at the evidence, we decided that we would open up on the 15th. We staggered the entry. And so it meant that we, by the end of term, which was around about the middle of July, we had welcomed back all of those year groups, but we also had an opportunity on 4 occasions to welcome back all of the other year groups in between for 1 day a week. And what that meant was it's really half a day a week, because we were inviting children to come back in half the class in the morning, half the class in the afternoon, because we were trying to exercise 2 meters of social distancing. That in itself was a logistical challenge. And in fact, what we recognized very early, you know, we've been talking about the word minutiae, and not to diminish the importance of what we're doing, but as a leader, we have characteristically been responsible for strategy, for big things, for things looking way into the future, looking at things at a strategic level. And I think that the pandemic has reduced us to returning to the absolute minutiae of every single decision, because every single decision is potentially life or death.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what, in answer to your original question, as in how has it been this week, primary and secondary schools came back to school. Most of us came back, almost all came back to school Monday. We've all had a week, and the week, as you said, you asked me about 2 weeks, the week prior to that and the weeks before that were putting every single signage, PPE, plans, rotas, risk assessments, but whilst waiting and knowing that we were going to get additional guidance at the 11th hour. And so said, so done. So you had a bank holiday last weekend, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the weekend before, we had a bank holiday, and that Friday night is when we got. So we had as a leadership team for my school, we had a meeting on that was Friday the 28th, and the night of Friday the 28th, which was the bank holiday weekend, is when we got the new guidance. Now that's how we are. It's the trying to assimilate the guidance, trying to make sure that we do whatever we need to do for our context. And then this last week has been putting it all into practice whilst children, families have been coming back to school.
So that seems to be standard across the board, where education systems, governments are waiting last minute to inform leadership of new guidance, which has to be implemented. So you and I talked about leadership fatigue, right? The idea of, you talked about all of the different things, the minutia of it all, having to figure out every single aspect of planning just to get the children back into school, just to get the adults back into school. And then here comes this guidance, this plan, with no consideration of what you had to do to just get to a step before school opens. And now you have to process that, because the plan is a broad plan with expectations, but every school is different, right? How do you even manage that? How do you even, I think about what I've had to do in the past. I think about what we had to do during the school year of the pandemic. And one of the, reasons why I had to make the executive decision of stepping away from the position was, I no longer could sustain myself in that leadership fatigue, because it does take a toll. So what did you have to do? Because that's a crucial pivoting game that happens.
That's right.
And we don't even think about, it also requires your team to really trust you, your team to trust you, the families to trust you. So, talk us through what that feels like and what that looks like.
Okay, so there's so many things in that. So yes, it requires my team to trust me, but it also means that I trust my team. Mm-hmm. And I've got a phenomenal dream team who make everything happen. And I have to, I can't even take credit for all the things that happen at my school. A lot of the time.
Farham Primary, I love them.
Yeah, they're superstars. And so there's also that expectation of change. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't acclimatized to an atmosphere of change. And now we plan for the unplanned. We know that there is going to be change. And so we have accepted that. And we have accepted that we will pivot on our heels. And we will accept that we are going to have new guidance at the very last minute, because quite sometimes, to be fair to the government, they are responding to what's happening in real time. Sometimes the guidance is not dissimilar to the previous, and so therefore there is a lot of U-turn that needs to happen. But at the same time, it does need to be read so that You can then discern, because remember, guidance is guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to discern what is mandatory statutory, what and enforceable by law, and what is unlawful, but please don't do it. What is it would be recommended and advised, and also what would be deemed to be good practice. And so you have to work out all of that in terms of the mandatory, statutory, non-negotiable. But then the negotiables, how are we going to work around that, and how will that work for our school? So I'll give you an example of a negotiable. We've got a rota of children coming into school initially. Lots of schools are trying to stagger the children. It's like a soft start at the beginning of this school day, the end of the school day, so that you can just kind of minimize the number of people that you have around, so that you can dampen down that contagion, or the potential for contagion.
Mm-hmm.
On the Monday, we had a plan where half the school would be coming in at one particular time, which would be 8:45, and the other part of the school would be coming in at 9 o'clock. Well, what do our parents do? They all turn up at 8:45 and wait in the playground till 9. Mm-hmm. So therefore, you've now got a situation, you've got everybody there for a long period of time. So on Monday, I said, we're not doing that again. And so Tuesday, we decided that everyone is starting all at the same time. We get them in as quickly as possible. And then, parents, thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to have. Can you vacate the premises now? There will be some schools who will interpret that guidance and say, we're not having parents on the premises. They collect their children from the gate, and we will send them out when we're ready. And I'm thinking that as a parent, I know that there are parents who want to come into the premises. Their children haven't been to school for many months. They want to have a little poke around and have a look through the windows of the classroom. They want to see who is the class teacher who's going to be taking their class. They need that feeling in their stomach that their children are safe, and then they can go off. And so it's all of those things, that the nuance of what you do, how you do, and when you do it. The other thing that comes to mind as well, and we've spoken about this, is that my usual style of leadership is very democratic, invitational, coaching, long-term development. I've since moved to a little bit more directive, a little bit more pace setting. Even in my vocabulary, I'm using more imperatives. And it's not because, it's a crisis situation to a certain extent. And this is a time when people are looking to leaders to give them clear direction. They want clarity, they want decisiveness, and they also want something in which they feel they can trust. And so if I go in and say, so what do you think? Should we do? No, this is not the time for that. Now is the time for a very incisive decision about what we're doing.
Well, we spoke about a lot of what you just shared in great detail. And yes, one of the important things that you said that people should know, and anytime I'm looking down, I want folks to just know I'm writing in my book, is that expectation of change. Right? I think that's so important. The thing about education is that it changes so much. It's not static. And then there's a lot of individuals who are not necessarily inside the school buildings who understand the complexity of what it means to run a building. But, sometimes we have to take a step back and think about what they're thinking on such a higher level in terms of trying to create uniformity across an entire country, whereas we have to think about what it means for our own school buildings and what it means for us as leaders to show up. So one of the things that's really great is that, one, your acknowledgement of your team. I would always say it wasn't always me. It required a team to do the work, and giving all praises to that team at Mount Hope Bridges Academy, because you can have a vision, but unless someone actually lives it out, it means nothing, right? And so that's what good leadership looks like. But also, this idea of even pivoting within 24 hours, realizing and understanding the needs of your families and parents, right? Because at the end of this day, especially you having a primary school where you have the younger children, where parents, in the midst of a pandemic, they want to be there. They want to make sure that their children are safe. They want to make sure that when they leave them and put them into your hands, that they're going to be able to come back to the same child at in the afternoon. And so all of those things have to be taken into consideration. All of these things are always weighing on you. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you was in terms of what does it look like for testing, right? Because I know here in the States, there isn't any mandatory testing for children or adults to come into the building. The New York City Department of Education has now required that teachers by a certain time, I believe maybe it's October, that they get tested. There's going to be this random testing that happens 10 to 20% of the staff population, well, across New York City, will be tested randomly, right? There are some people who are right now on their own getting tested. And so you're starting to see numbers rise up because on, I want to say Tuesday or Wednesday, there was 6 people. Thursday, there was already 18 people. So already there's triple of numbers. And these are people who are asymptomatic. So what does that look like? Are there any specific regulations that you all have? You know, like, yeah, what does it look like?
So again, giving you the wider context, a little bit of breaking news that the R rate, you know, the R rate, the rate of infection has risen over the last 7 days. And funny how that coincides with schools opening over the last 7 days, but that's just me. We have a testing regime which is still having some obstacles. I'm being very diplomatic when I say that. The obstacles have been generally about not so much the number of tests that are available, but it's where the location of the test center in regards to where you are. And so some people have been having to, or been indicated or directed to places which have been very far afield to go and get a test if they've been tracked or traced, or if they just develop symptoms. So what that means, also again, in the last few days, the Prime Minister has announced that we are going to have the rule of 6, which means because of the concerns about the numbers of people who have contracted COVID, we're going to now have 6 people who are allowed to meet socially and nothing more than that. There are some exceptions, but the key thing is that people are concerned that in the general public, if you are a group of 6 people, meeting socially, if it's 7, you can't. However, we don't have that same rule afforded to us in education. So we've got classrooms of 30 kids. We've got even rooms where we will have had in-service training with 6, 7, 8 members of the staff who don't live all in the same family, if you see what I mean. So in terms of what's happening in schools is that we have, if a child develops or an adult develops any symptoms, they're immediately asked to go to, well, first of all, we have to don the relevant PPE, put them in a room where we can isolate them until their parents come to collect them, give the parents a particular number for the National Health Service. We have a 191 number that they're supposed to call. I'm making it up, it's 119. It's a specific number, it's a COVID helpline. It will helpfully direct them to where they can get a test. We need to get, this is the key thing, getting a test as quickly as possible, getting the test result as quickly as possible, acting on that test result as quickly as possible, because it means then that if we need to if people need to self-isolate, or if we need to close particular year groups. So we're keeping a class as a bubble at the moment, and that's possible in a primary school to a certain extent. There is some crossing of bubbles sometimes, and we're trying to minimize that, where it's, so in my every year group at school, I have 120 children in a year group. It's a larger than average primary school for the UK.
How many do you have overall?
930 children.
Okay.
And so what I don't want to do is have a bubble that's a year group, which means that if 2 children are test positive, that I then have to send 120 children home. So I'm also chair of a trust of an academy trust of 9 primary schools. And one of the schools, which is a 3 form of entry school, which means that each year group has 3 classes. We opened on Monday and closed on Monday, that particular school, because of a member of staff who tested positive. And in fact, her having been in contact with lots of different members of staff, it meant that we didn't have, and they had to self-isolate for the next 10 to 14 days. It then meant that we didn't have enough people to run the school. And so therefore the school had to close on Monday morning. The same morning it opened, it had to close. So the rules are, so in answer to your question, the rules around testing, I've explained them, but the government sent us 10 home school testing kits, which we can allocate either to staff or pupils if they're having difficulty getting tests elsewhere. In fact, we delivered one to a child with special educational needs this week, just because he was exhibiting symptoms, and it would be better for him to be tested at home than it would be for him to be tested somewhere else, just because of his needs. And we're awaiting the results of that test. So I think there's an inevitability about the sheer numbers. If you've got 930 children and 150 members of staff, the sheer inevitability of somebody testing positive in a context of the R rate being above 1, and there being social meeting in social groups that the rule of 6 being implemented, then we'll just see how this goes. I think there are going to be a number of people who are just going to be watching to see how we can do this.
So my understanding is there is a mandate in place that there are only allowed to be 6 people in public spaces.
Yeah, from Monday coming.
Yes, so from Monday. But the exception to the rule is applied to schools where you can have up to 20, 30 children in a room. Is that still allowable? Okay. And so there is no specific turnaround date, right? They would want to make sure that there's testing, if testing needs to be done, but there is no, we're going to have it done within 24 hours. It's kind of like still the process of you go, you get the test, and everybody just waits for the results.
It depends on where and how you've been tested.
Okay.
So home kits will have a particular period of time. Going to a particular test center would have a particular, so test centers, you can probably get your test result within 12 hours. I've had experience from somebody else of that.
Okay, so what about tracing? Because you talked about the teacher who, because of they had contact with several individuals in the school, that's why the school had to close. What's the process of tracing? So I know that right now the way it stands is, and I don't know if it's changed because things change on a daily basis in the Department of Education. I'm speaking in terms of New York. That if there was a class that had one adult or one child who was infected, that one class would be quarantined. So those children in that room would be quarantined at home for 14 days. However, if there was 2 in 2 separate rooms, then that means the entire school has to be quarantined, but people need to be tested to determine whether or not they can come back. And so here's what's mind blowing to me, because we're only testing and tracing the children and the adults, right? But that's not to say that the parents at home haven't been out and about. That's not to say that the friends that they walk with, and we don't take into consideration, like we create like a bubble for the school, like we're only focused on the school. But I'm thinking to myself, there's a whole world of activities that are happening beyond the school that we have no control over, right? And especially this past weekend with the holiday in New York, last week, in the States, it was the last holiday for the summer. And people were like, I'm going to get it fully in, I'm going to hang out. And then there was the survey that was sent Monday night, like literally in the evening when, you know, most adults are trying to get themselves together, their mind right to get back into the school building. And it was like, okay, if you answer yes to any of these questions, that means you can't go to work. And people didn't know that until they answered. Like there were some folks who went away for the weekend with their families. And as long as they left outside of New York City or New York State, they were not allowed to come back into the school building. They had to quarantine. They have to quarantine for 14 days or get a test done that shows that they are capable of going back to the school building and not infected. You know, and so I wonder, like that alone is causing me a lot of fatigue, just thinking about that, because you as a school leader, your safety and that of your team is always in danger because you have no control over anyone else's behaviors outside of your building.
True. So I think you're touching a nerve here, which is the concept of the bubble. Mm-hmm. So the concept of the bubble would be effective if this was an only child at boarding school.
Right.
So if you have siblings, the bubble bursts as soon as you meet your sibling after school, or once you've gone to the high road and you've been shopping, or when you've gone home to meet with everybody else in your household who has gone off and done their different things. And then we're back into the bubble again the next morning. So I think it's about degrees of trying to keep a purity about where people go and what people do. And I think that the social, the rule of 6 is part of trying to restrict what people do once they are not in an educational setting. The exceptions to the rule of 6, which might be quite interesting, weddings, funerals, COVID secure team sports, schools, workplaces, and households or support bubbles that have more than 6 people in them will all be exempt.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. How do you feel about that? All right, I'll ask another question.
Yeah, you're trying to get reported, aren't you?
No. Don't answer. Don't answer that question. So how do you ensure that your children have what they need at this point, right? So we know all of that. And one of the things that we talked about, because you and I stayed on the phone for maybe an hour talking through a lot of this. And then we were like, you know what? We haven't even talked about instruction. And I had a question that was here, so I wanted to honor the question. Giovanni, good morning. Thank you for joining us. He was like, is he understanding that the year groups prevents the American concept of holdovers in a grade from happening?
That's right.
That answers
it. So yeah, we don't hold children back. Whatever's happened, they move up. And so, as you know, sometimes the gaps broaden the higher up they go through school. So in terms of the recovery curriculum is what we were kind of discussing, and also provision for catch-up. And these are the phrases that are being used in the UK. Recovery curriculum is taking into consideration, particularly initially, that there are going to be some mental health issues. I was listening to something this morning, and it was an interview with somebody else and Arianna Huffington. And she was quoting the person who was interviewing her. And he said, COVID is a virus with a very, it's kind of like, it's a tornado with a very long tail. And I would say it's probably got about 9 tails. Yeah. And so one of the things that we've all been concerned about is the well-being of our children. We have a music teacher who's fabulous, and she has different classes throughout the year groups. And she has been.
I met that teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
I love that class. Oh my God. It was Go ahead, go ahead. It was so
Yes.
exciting. It was amazing.
So she's been really insightful in starting the class by asking everybody how they are, and have they had any, loss within their or bereavements or anything within their families, their friends and families. And she reported about 9 children on average per class who are putting up their hands and saying they know of somebody who's either passed away, either a friend or a relative, or somebody that they've known within their family. That equates to 30% of our pupils. So I'm not saying that that's an accurate figure because I haven't done that all the way through the school. But if you think about one class, nine children, that's quite a lot. And so the recovery curriculum is acknowledging that we need to find out what's happened to children whilst they've been off. We need to be able to use either texts or use learning, which is going to acknowledge that and be able to deal with it. And so there have been some lovely texts that have been suggested. The other thing is about the catch-up curriculum. And so we're supposed to be spending this part of the term really trying to assess where children actually are, because there will be some children who haven't been back to school since March 20th, and there'll be some children who were coming to school on a daily basis if they were in the particular year groups that I explained, and there'll be some that maybe dropped in for a day a week, and there'll be some, as we said, they've got all sorts of different experiences. Some who sat on the edge of a bed in a multiple occupancy house with no connectivity whatsoever, where we've had to provide maybe packs for them, physical packs of work that they can do, and maybe not have the capacity to give them the feedback. So we are really, in answer to your question, this is about trying to ensure that we implement a recovery curriculum, do a catch up, assess where children are, try and catch up to a certain extent. And then the government have offered some funding for us to be able to give some one-to-one tuition or some one-to-one lessons for children where that's going to be needed on a needs-led basis. And also for those children who are deemed vulnerable, they would also be entitled to additional educational services.
So those children who haven't been in school since March, what have been some of the contributing factors to that?
So the main, sometimes they have been deemed to be shielding. So most of them will not have been back because they're shielding for some, reason. But the other thing is, it wasn't mandatory or statutory for those children to come back. The parents had the right to keep them at home. And many of the parents were like, I'm not ready. This is a pandemic. Our area in the local newspaper, they had been saying that we were either the first or the second area in the country to have the highest death rate. I mean, sometimes you can't take all these things verbatim, but it's a needy community where there will have been lots of deaths due to COVID and due to the ways in which people live, and because of poverty, and also because of ethnicity. We've seen the statistics around the proportions of males or females or Black people or Indian people, etc. So the main reason was they're just scared and they're not ready to send their children to school. But now that we're in a position where it's no longer, you can send them if you want to or not, it's mandatory, it's statutory now. And we've had a really good turnout. By the end of last week, we had about 95, 96% of our children in school, which is fabulous. And I could see from my colleagues that they've had quite a high turnout as well. But there's one particular child that I had an interview with this week. I met with both her parents. I asked them just to come in. They're really not happy for their child to come back to school. The child has an underlying health condition, which many children have, but they really wanted a risk assessment for that particular condition. They wanted me to take the temperatures of all of the children in school. They wanted me to, on a daily basis. They would like me to take the temperature of the staff on a daily basis so that we would be able to discern whether or not those people had indicators for COVID. it's people are still apprehensive. People are still scared.
So how do you make sure that in the schools that that safety continues? Because especially you have the little ones, right? And that I'll be honest, I could not do primary years. I was good with middle school and high school, which are the children from 11 up, simply because you can say something and they can comprehend, even if you have to teach yourself, but there's a certain way you can lean in and they get
What
it.
did I say? My baby.
But I know because they're the babies, they are very clingy. They want to, they need hugs and they want touch, and that's just part of their socialization. And so how do you even control that? How does that even look? And even for the teacher, I just think about what it must feel like as the teacher, right? Because I know, like on a day-to-day basis, my thing was like I always gave my kids hugs because I just
Yeah.
they, some of them just never receive a hug, or
Yeah.
it's just a matter of just saying I love you and I'm glad you're here.
Mhm.
And if you're that type of leader or
Mhm.
you've established
Right.
that type of culture in your classroom, it is very, very hard to now not do that because that's part of who you are. Um, and so, I think that there's something that is not fully spoken about is just we think about the social emotional needs of the children, but what it really is doing to the adults as well. That idea of, you know, you get into teaching because you love it. At least you're supposed to love it. And you feel like you're what you're doing is impacting humanity in some way, shape, or form. And you have such tremendous um, influence over a young person, someone who is shaping their view of the world. And we know how important love and caring and being nurturing that looks like. And to do that, it requires you to be loving, right? Which is also very interesting because since we've been in COVID, you don't hear anyone talking about robots in the classroom, right? Because I haven't heard anything about robots and all this stuff. Will robots take over classrooms? No, obviously, because right now this would be the best time, right? Because for sanitary purposes, the robot will be the best person. But now people are realizing like that human to human contact is so important. And so, how do like, have your teachers voice that concern? How do you address that concern? What is that now that you're back to remote? What is that looking like? How does that translate to still show that care virtually?
So I think it's a different mindset, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
This week, it just what you were saying just reminded me of me going to the dining hall this week, and there was a child who came to talk to me about. She was very gushing, and normally I know that I would be very tactile with children. I mean, obviously, I've got a DBS, we call it a disclosure and barring service. It's this kind of safeguarding thing. We're not supposed to be touching the children as such, so let's be clear about that. Mm-hmm. However, in terms of just showing affection with children, sometimes you would, in a very kind of safeguarding way, do so, so that's difficult. But I think what's really interesting from what you bring up is the idea of us really exploiting remote learning, and we kind of haven't really touched on that. We know that there is a potential and perhaps even inevitability about us going into lockdown again. And so what is it that we've learned about remote learning that we can not only just use whilst we're in lockdown, but actually what is it that we can use even just engaging with children virtually? And I was having a look at, I think her name is Dana Delaney Williams, who runs something called American High School. And it's a program of virtual learning. And I think that something I saw on Instagram today, in that is something that's really picking up now, because all the best aspects of virtual learning, all the best aspects of what I call agile learning, remote learning, all of that stuff, we need to be making our speciality now so that we can engage in the learning for children. And in fact, it's funny, I overheard one of my teachers saying, I'm doing this thing on Google platforms, and actually I'm doing this thing and I'm now setting that for homework because I know, or for home learning as we call it, because because what I'm trying to do in the classroom means that I haven't got enough time to do that, so I'm now setting that as that. So ways in which we can work in a way where the children get more than the full complement of their learning, and we do it in a way which is going to ensure that it's still quality. We're not fobbing children off with just go over in a corner, a virtual corner, and do that. The second thing that we haven't spoken about is how we negotiate remote working with staff. Now, you've heard me say there's 150 members of staff. I'm not trying to have everybody there all at the same time. There are some opportunities, and I was just having a look on McKinsey were talking about something where they said that it's not just about the opportunities for remote working in terms of the people, it's particular jobs can be best done from home or from wherever. So when I think about my administration team, and we call admin as in, attendance officer, admissions officer, the receptionist, HR, payroll, etc. Do they have to be there all day, every day? Are there particular functions that they can do remotely one day a week, which means it minimizes the number of adults in the school office so that we're minimizing the likelihood of them catching COVID from each other because they're just not able to socially distance. So all of those things that we're thinking about the learning, but we're also thinking about the opportunities for working remotely, learning remotely. And I don't like the word remote because it makes it sound, it's blended and it's agile. Let's think about the opportunities for blended learning and agile working.
So you talked about assuring the quality, right, of instruction. And one of my fears that I have is like, one of my fears is how this becomes another thing, part of a checklist of what is it, rubrics and checklists. So there was a post recently of a teacher who she from Black Teachers Rock, Black Teachers Rock, Black Girls Teach, sorry. I had a brain fart for a minute. Black Girls.
They may rock too, who knows?
Yeah, no, they do, but I wanted to get the name right. So the founder is Deidre Fogarty, and she had put up a post about how there was this particular school where the teacher did an amazing job. Like, she swagged out her room in her home for remote learning. Mm-hmm. And the principal went on and on about how amazing this was. And then all of a sudden, a week later or 2 weeks later, it became part of a rubric, like an assessment for virtual learning. And my question is, should that be the focus, or are we looking at how we're going to make sure how we're targeting gaps, how we're going to target the gaps? How do we make sure that every child has a learning plan? And what are we doing collectively to make sure, one, that's happening throughout their entire school population, but then what are the supports looking like from the leadership side? And so there's just, to me, some in this moment where education really has an opportunity of doing things different, right? So we recognize that remote learning is going to be here to stay in some way, shape, or form, because on a university level, they're realizing the brick and mortar part of it. You can save a lot of money by having students at home doing the work. And but we start to focus so much on those things as opposed to the quality of what needs to be happening for the children. Because at the end of the day, all of that other stuff is irrelevant. It's not going to affect generations. It's not going to have tremendous impact. But if we're not assuring that children are learning effectively, if we're not making sure that staff members are properly developed, because that's another area that we have to make sure that the people who are in the classroom have the capacity, right? Because there's a lot of people who were tech afraid before, and then they were thrown into this world, and then the holidays came and they were like, whew, thank God we're going to be back in the building. And then lo and behold, you're in the building for a week, and then it's just like, nope, you got to go back home. What would be some ways that you're thinking, if there are leaders who are watching, they can create this assurance of the balance of not focusing so much on the fluff, but we really got to get to the thing that's most important?
I think it's discerning what's fluff and what's quality assurance. And so I'll give you an example. So you use the example of that particular colleague who, you know, really kind of brought her room up to a high standard. And so that was then I would call it disseminating good practice, where somebody's recognized that and said, you know what? All children are entitled to that quality of experience if they're going to be working remotely. In the same way that you and I have taken attention to how we're physically presenting today and also what our backgrounds look like. You know, we want the same thing for our children. There has to be a way in which children get an aesthetic, not just Zoom protocols, but they get a quality, which is not just about the aesthetic, it's also a quality that, because this is something that is it's not that you can move from classroom to classroom and you can say, right, okay, I can see this and I can know that, you know, in terms of a particular minimum quality, this is what people are getting. We've got to be really sure that there is consistency of quality in the same way that we've been trying to do before. There's that quality assurance. There is every opportunity for children to get the best experience and to maximize their learning. Many of us are in unknown territory, and it's yes, there are important things about that, but we're also still having to deal with the life and death issues. So I really want us now, because there are some things that we've got under our belt and we just know how to get them organized. I really want us now to think about our core purpose. We are educational establishments. We are here to ensure that children have a particular level and quality of education. Mm-hmm. Are there a myriad of ways in which we can do that without stifling the creativity and the professionalism of individual teachers? I've always been very clear that I appoint difference. And so if I was going to advise anybody who was a new head or new principal, take the time, be brave enough to appoint people who are all very different. You don't want clones of yourself in the classroom. You want the children to, because they don't often in our communities get the opportunity to meet different people, appoint different so that they have a really good range of people that they're going to interact with, who can bring something to not only their education experience, but their holistic experience in the school space.
I'm looking at some of the messages. Good morning to everyone who are joining us. We have folks from the UAE. We nice. Have folks from the Philippines. We have folks from the United States who are joining us. Thank you so much for being here with us right now. You know what I loved what you said was you have to be brave to appoint people who are not like you. You have to be brave. And it's interesting that you use the word bravery in there, because you know, I think that a lot of people fear different mindsets, and there's a level of threat that comes with not everyone, that someone else who thinks differently, who doesn't speak the same way as you, um, that somehow means that's taking away from you and your leadership. And that's not necessarily the case. What you're looking is for people to have the same appreciation and belief in the mission and vision of the school, but they may come with different tools and strategies of how to do it. And that also requires you to grow, right? Because as long as you want to have people around you who are going to just clone what it is you do, then you're not willing to grow and see things from a different perspective. And that also means you have no vision. I just personally have to say that. I want to encourage folks who are joining us, if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat. While we are transmitting through Zoom, I do have, I'm trying to check to see what people are saying. So there's good feedback. People are speaking amongst themselves. Rolanda says, school is a social environment. It's hard for children to not carry on as if it's not. And that's very important part of their social development. And yes, we totally agree to that. And so there's something that I know that people, I'm going to ask this one last thing as we wrap up. There are a lot of parents who feel like, I understand there's an importance of safety, but what about the kids not being in school and them falling behind, right? And I always take a deep pause and a deep breath, because I think to myself, what's more important to you, right? What's more important? And then I also think to myself, there clearly is a parent who lacks something. They lack the support of having their children at home. One, whether it's financially, they can't have their children at home. Two, academically, they can't support their children at home. Three, they have no way of knowing how to really create a learning environment that would be reflective of one that they had at school. And so to the parent who's most worried, who's thinking about what about my child and what about them losing out on their academics, what is one thing, or you can name as many, but up to 3 things that a parent can do if that's one of their major concerns?
So I think the main thing is to really keep in touch with the class teacher, because at least when you have established a relationship with the class teacher and you are collaborating, you are then able to support that child holistically. And so it doesn't become something which is just about a miscommunication and a justification of either side. It becomes, the focus is the child. They need this. I'm going to send you this. Let me give you some feedback and so on. So you've got that that dialogue going on between home and school, and where the child, however old the child is, where they can't play one off against the other. I think that's key, the communication and the collaboration between you and the class teacher. The other thing I think is that there are so many resources now that parents, if they have a good dig about on all sorts of platforms, they will find stuff for themselves. But again, that's where the teacher is key, because the teacher will also be able to say, have a look at this website, have a look at that, and so on, and then be able to guide to the right things that are going to be appropriate for where that child is in that particular subject at that particular age and stage of their development. The other thing I think that the parents can do is be very careful about what they discuss with children around and what they discuss without children around. I was party to a conversation this week that I really wish had been just adults in the room, because children are like absolute sponges. Yeah, they've got that hearing, but it's not just about the hearing. They're picking up the vibe from if their parents are nervous, they're nervous. If their parents are worried, they're worried. If their parents are, skeptical about particular things, then they're going to be skeptical about particular things. There will be things that we will speak about as adults that we don't always want our children to absorb. And so that would be the other thing that I would say would be quite useful.
Okay. So we're coming to the end, the complete end, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. And this one is the most important. That's why I saved it to the end. Self-care, taking care of oneself during this time. There is tremendous amount of stress, and I particularly am someone who knows. You know, you and I have had plenty of conversations in the past where you have always said to me, you have to make sure you take care of yourself. You have to take time for yourself. And we preach to each other as the choir, but understanding how much of an undertaking, especially right now during these times, it's hard, because even if you're not in your school building, you're absorbing all of the things that's just happening in the world, the uprising that's happening, politics, you know, so you try to shield yourself, but it's everywhere. If you turn on your TV, if you look at your phone, and so it's difficult, right? So what advice can you give? What advice, like, would you offer? You know, I feel I can't tell everyone you have to resign from your position, because that's not what I would ever want to do. I never wanted to have to get to a place of resigning from my position. But now that I'm no longer in the position of a principal, I realize how important it is to be intentional about morning meditation, about journaling, about taking a pause and stepping back. But also, you know, thinking about leadership style, how you have to lean on people, and the idea of not so much, I believe that I was very brave in hiring who I hired to do what they needed to be done, but being clear and transparent about what I need and trusting them to do it, because I was always in my head of how things need to get done and not bothering people. Because I also would be up at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, having an idea, and I need to execute it by the next day. So, you know, as we leave people, as we all leave this platform this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you're at, or evening at Gym in the Philippines, what would you say in terms of self-care and what folks should prioritize?
So this is a difficult one, because I know that there will be people around us very close to us who call us the two biggest hypocrites talking about self-care. Like, you know, even when I sometimes will call you Nadia, and I'll be like, okay, Nadia, so I've just had a look at social media and you've been busy, haven't you? I'm concerned. When you take a moment to do blah, and my teams will sometimes do the same. I've had a very interesting week. And it's been one of those things where my team, the last thing they said to me before we left yesterday was, you know, I hope you're going to take some time for yourself. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm talking to Nadia at 1, and then I'm going to here. And they're like, no. However, self-care is not even an option anymore. And it's become a little bit of a cliche. And during the time that we were in lockdown, I spoke to an educational psychologist, and she referred me to, because I wanted to be able to support my teams in terms of their self-care, particularly returning. And she referred me to the National Health Service 5 ways to well-being, which are connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. But the one I'm going to really focus on is the take notice. Take notice is more or less take notice of yourself, know what your triggers are, know how you operate best. So, and it's also that thing about knowing better, so doing better. There's something perverse in us where we seem to reward ourselves with bad things. So it's, oh my God, that was one hell of a week. I'm going to get drunk and I'm going to go and eat fish and chips. And and I'm going to, you know, go to bed really late or whatever it is. actually there are so many things that we can be doing for ourselves which actually nourish us. So I know that when I take notice of myself, I'm better off when I go to bed early and I wake up early. So that means I need to kind of do that. I know that when I think about all of these different things in which, you know, when we talk about, say, give, what is it that I'm giving? So today we're giving our time to share. This is part of our well-being. The keeping active part of it. Yeah. Again, whatever works for you, taking notice of what works for you. I know that what works for me is power walking. I know that what works for me is yoga. I'm not talking about any intensely now and again. I know what works for me is weight training and so on. Again, taking notice of what works for you. The other things that are about, in terms of the connecting, there's nothing better than having a conversation with somebody, making just connections with friends and family, and so on. But the most important thing, as I said, yes, keep learning, because again, this is what we're doing today. But the taking notice of you as an individual and knowing what you as an individual need to be able to function at your best.
Where can they find those 5 things? Is there a website?
Yeah, website is nhs.org.
NHS.org?
Yeah, so NHS stands for National Health Service. Sorry, we have one. Just not saying anything.
No, it does. No, it's fine. You know, because at the end of the day, universally, it works for everyone. And I don't know if there's another one that's as concrete with the 5 things. And I think that was very important. And the part that you said about noticing, it is so important, because when you notice, it forces you to then take the pause, right? And it forces you to reflect, do all those things, but you have to be in tune with your body. So what I would say as educators, we notice everything else about what's happening with children. That's our number one focus, but we fail to notice the things that's happening to us. And our bodies are constantly giving us signs before they ring the alarm that there's a fire, right? And so we have to be self-aware. So with that, I hope that everyone enjoyed our conversation today. I want to just wrap up with one of the 5 key things that came from this conversation. And I hope that it will allow others to join in. So whatever you take from this, please make sure that you share. But I'm going to start with these 5. So one is not feeling alone. Like, this is why we have this conversation across the pond, as we say it, because it was important for us to understand that education is a global issue. It's a community issue. It's not one off. It's not in one building. It's not one adult. It is a global issue, and everyone is struggling and trying to figure things out and trying to make the best of what we've been dealt with. The next thing is around not feeling stress. And I don't say that lightly. What I mean is, Karen and I spoke about this, like, the inevitable is the inevitable. You know that you're up against a pandemic. You know that the government is going to come with a mandate, something that you have to do. But being adaptive to that helps to minimize some of those stressors, but also identifying who are the people you're going to lean on when those things happen, because you need that person who's going to help you stay off the ledge. I call it, like, I could be a jumper and I might have to text Karen or call Karen, or she may just realize from social media, I need to check in on her. She's just doing a little too much, and I'm just concerned about her well-being. The other thing is the way things are done in the school, working collectively as a team, as opposed to as an individual. And you stated, like, even taking an assessment of who really needs to be in the building and who doesn't. How can we minimize the stress of people being in a place when they don't have to be? So those admin people could possibly stay home. The teachers could have a different schedule, but you have to be flexible with that. Understand, as leaders, you are engaging in daily you're a daily practitioner. So as a daily practitioner, you have to be brave. You have to be creative. You have to show up. You have to be vulnerable and be transparent.
don't try to come into this moment being perfect, being too demanding. Don't ask of people what you're not willing to do, because right now, leadership looks like you are the one engaging, you're the one willing to step into the fire, but you're going to step into the fire with your team if need be, and you're going to make sure that they safely come out of it. And then the last thing is around self-care. Self-care is a non-negotiable. It is not something that you can just perhaps maybe do later. You have to be intentional about your time. You have to be intentional about making, whether it's a space in your home where you just retreat, calendaring a day and a place that you're going to go to, and disconnecting. You know, we stay connected to social media, we stay connected to our friends and family, but sometimes you just have to be like, for the next 2, 3 hours, for the next day, I will not be in communication, just because you need to do that, because everything that you absorb is energy, and energy goes into your body and comes out in different ways, and it goes into your organs and you don't even realize it. So subconsciously, that alone can be stressful, and it impacts your internal organs, that then impacts your mental health. So our goal is to always inform and help to educate you on best ways of taking care of yourselves and our education community, but just understanding that, again, globally, this is what citizenship looks like. Like, we talk about the buzzwords, but taking care of each other is so important. So, Karen, do you have any final words before we sign off today?
The only thing that I wanted to add is that when I was talking about the admin staff having the opportunity to work remotely, there are so many opportunities with trust that we can allow teaching staff to work remotely. The in-service train, this medium that we're using now, you can use that for in-service training. You can use that, they can have their non-contact time away from school. They can have that at home. They can leave school at a decent time, so that whatever it is that they need to do that remotely, but not stay in the school building. There are so many ways in which, there are so many things that teachers do that people feel, well, they're teachers, they've got to be in the classroom all the time, or they've got to be in the school all the time. They don't have to be. And so there are some things that can be done remotely. Let's be kind to each other. Let's trust each other.
And Colin had added being at peace with yourself. And so I'm going to agree to that. You have to be gentle with yourself, right? This is so far beyond our control. So you cannot get bogged down if things are not going according to plan. Sometimes that is the plan, but things not to go according to your plan. It's something so much greater than us. So we hope that you enjoyed. We look forward to meeting with you again. This is going to be a monthly conversation. So please look out for the next flyer that will share the date. But this was fun. I love it. I love being with my sister girl. I can't wait until I get back to London, so that we can hug and sit next to each other and have this conversation. But I want everyone to enjoy the rest of what you have left of your Saturday. And please just be well, gentle and kind to yourselves, and make sure you take care of others. Until next time, folks, have a good night.
Thank you, Nadia.
You're welcome. Love you, Karen.